Hello, everyone, and welcome to Serious Coin, the podcast where we have rich conversations about wealth. I'm your host, Kelly Willis Green. Today's episode brought to my mind the words of one of my favorite authors, Truman Capote. And he wrote that more tears are shed over answered prayers than unanswered ones. Now, I expect when he wrote that, Capote wasn't thinking about entrepreneurs who sold a business for 9 and 10-figure sums, but he could have been. Because today we're exploring what happens to entrepreneurs after a liquidity event. Now, on one hand, there's obviously elation, transformational wealth, new freedoms, and seemingly endless possibilities. But on the other hand, many founders experience a profound sense of loss and bewildering emotions related to their identity and sense of purpose. Joining me to explore the topic is someone who has had firsthand experience. My guest is Stuart Wolff, entrepreneur, founder, business coach, and mentor. Stu sold his own business 10 years ago, and he's a Tiger 21 chair who's helped other entrepreneurs grapple with this two-sided coin of cashing out. If you don't know Tiger 21, it's an international networking and peer-to-peer learning community for people who have liquid assets of $20 million or more. Most of their members, like Stu, are founders and entrepreneurs. Stu's story is that in 1997, he founded the Wolff Group. They were a sales and marketing agency for food manufacturers, and they had operations in 10 states across the Midwestern U.S. Stu and his business partner, Mike McDonald, had built the company to more than $1 billion in annual revenue when they saw an opportunity to capitalize on consolidation trends that were happening in their industry, and they sold. And so there he was, financially independent, yet unable to retire. Stu told me the very word terrifies him. So he started a business consulting and coaching practice, the Wolff Leadership Group, and later joined Tiger 21 as a chair for a group in the Detroit area. What Stu offered in conversation with me today were raw and honest insights into the highs and lows of post-sale reality. I think for anybody who sold or is contemplating the sale of their business, and for their family members, friends, and advisors, this episode will share insights that few people talk about. So if you've ever wondered what it's really like to sell a business, then you won't want to miss this conversation. I started by asking Stu to describe the circumstances that led to the sale of his company.
We were actually preparing 5 years in advance for this consolidation. So we were in a great spot and we were ready and prepared for it. Our plan was actually to nationalize our business, and we would be a part of one of the leaders in trying to consolidate our industry. Everything that my partner and I, Mike, had felt and thought and believed in, it all happened. Not that we're gurus in any way, but it all did happen. And so we were in the right place at the right time. We found and realized that our vision of nationalizing the Wolff Group didn't happen. The industry started to consolidate at a quicker scale. We actually had a private equity firm that was interested in partnering with us, but some of the larger brokers on the retail grocery side of the industry all of a sudden wanted to consolidate and be in our industry as well, and they started to buy up companies we were looking to merge in.
So did you run a process then? It sounds like you had a couple of potential buyers, strategic, private equity. Did you run a process?
We did. In the end, we had 3 potential buyers for our business. And I wouldn't call it a process. We met with each of the potential buyers, and we ended up going with who we thought was the right fit, whom for our organization we aligned with from a core value and cultural standpoint, because we did 11 strategic acquisitions leading up to putting our organization together. We knew how important that was and wanted to make sure we were aligned properly, as well as we went from a 165 employee organization into a 40,000 employee organization. So we wanted to make sure we did our best due diligence to find the right fit, not for us, because we knew we'd eventually exit out, but for the rest of our 165 employees that depended on our business to help them feed their families and live their lives.
So I know you're a planner by nature and you did all that due diligence. Were there any surprises subsequent to the sale for you?
Yeah, the biggest surprise, and this might sound crazy, but the biggest surprise happened about 6 months after I sold the business. And it was at that point when I truly realized I sold the business. And the reason being was here I'm part of this national organization, and I am being told, okay, everyone needs to cut their payroll by 10%. And I'm thinking, what? Those were decisions I used to make. Who's
Right, right.
telling me this? We have a profitable organization. Why would we do that? Makes no sense. And I'm being very frank and honest. That was the first time I realized I actually sold my business and had no control over key and strategic decisions like that.
So, how did you feel about it? How did you deal with it?
It really was stressful. I talked to a therapist about it because there was a deep sense of loss when I realized that. And it hit me profoundly. And I knew I needed to rebound from it because I still had 165 families that needed to make sure this happened and happened properly. I needed to talk to somebody professionally to get some outside help, and it was helpful for me, helped me regroup and get back on the same page, and I was able to do that, but it had a deep impact.
I want to talk about the loss and the broader sense that entrepreneurs experience around that. But I'm curious, was there any one piece of advice that the therapist gave you that was a turning point for you that helped you see it in a different light?
What we realized was, and I'm not trying to get too deep here, but it was such a profound sense of loss. It brought me back to when I was a child. When I was 10 years old, my sister died of leukemia. And she helped bring it back that that was another profound sense of loss in my life, and that it brought me back to those feelings again. And growing up back then, we didn't really process our feelings at that point. So they were still, even though this happened years and years ago, those feelings were still there. So she helped me process through it and realize that life needs to move on and that that's the past. I need to be present, and help me just become present. And I think that was a turning moment for me.
I was really touched by what Stu shared about the feelings that were triggered from the sale of his business. It was a very personal reflection, but I expect many founders can relate. And as he was talking, one word kept coming to my mind, and that was grief, which we usually think of in response to the death of someone close to us. But grief is the natural human response to any significant loss. I know of one entrepreneur who dealt with the sale of his business and the death of his spouse, both within a 3-year period, and he confessed he wasn't sure which loss was more difficult. As somebody who studied grief following the death of my husband in 2011, I've learned about the many ways we experience loss. There's primary loss, which in this case, the sale of one's business, and then there are secondary losses that emerge as a consequence. And in this case, loss of purpose, loss of the social network within the business, loss of stature, loss of title, loss of the company jet, who knows? These are just some of the dominoes that fall as a result of exiting. And I wanted to get Stu's take on why they have so much impact.
It goes right to the core of your identity, and it's painful. There is this sense of who am I and where do I go from here? And I'll speak for myself and I'll speak for my Tiger members that I have the opportunity to spend time with. It impacts the loss of their identity as to what do I do now? What do I wake up and do? As simple as that. My day is like, what's my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
Who needs me? Who wants to hear from me now? A real deep concern for me was going 100 miles an hour down to 10 miles an hour. And that reality is frightening when that becomes real. And I've seen it firsthand. I felt it myself, but I see it firsthand in others.
When you see it firsthand, can you give me an example that gives a sense of how that loss of identity has manifested itself?
Well, there's depression. I can think of a couple people that I know that emotionally became depressed, and it's real. And so that's had an impact. I'd say there's also some fatigue in the sense like, I don't know what to do anymore. So it kind of weakens the person as to they don't have this drive. And what am I supposed to do moving forward? So I've seen it where it's a physical and emotional impact on people.
Does it matter the age of the person?
Great question. I do think for people like myself, I'll be 63 later this week. I know for people in my generation, yes, I think it has profound impact. I've seen in younger, I have a little bit of experience seeing younger. I do think they get a sense of loss, but I think there's also this other energy to bounce back and say, okay, they're not done. So there's going to be what's the next thing I'm doing. But for people in my age group and generation might think I'm quote unquote retiring. When that thought of retire, just the word retire scares the heck out of me. I don't even like saying it. That really creates fear for me. At first you're thinking, well, I'll have all this money so I don't have to work. But it's not about that. For me, I didn't have a ton of hobbies. I mean, I like to work out, I like to go out on my boat, I love to read, but I didn't have a lot of hobbies that, I think take up a lot of time. So it was a real concern for me. My kids are grown and out of the house. So all of a sudden, there's a big void. And my wife was an interior designer. She had her business going. So what am I going to do? Sit at home? So I knew that wasn't me. So I knew, after being an entrepreneur for all these years, it just doesn't turn off.
I want to draw attention to the sense of purpose that Stu talked about, because a Tiger 21 report called Life After Selling a Business referenced several studies that linked purpose to mental health, physical health, and even longevity. Apparently, people with a greater sense of purpose are more likely to outlive their peers. Now, Stu, of course, was able to find new purpose through his coaching practice. And today, he's passionate about helping small to medium business owners grow their companies and live a better life at the same time, using a system he implements known as EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, a tool he used to grow his previous company. I asked him whether he had other examples of entrepreneurs who've reinvented themselves post-exit.
It's a Tiger member. He sold his business. He stayed on for a period of time. And then the company said, well, we no longer need you. Talk about feeling, okay, I don't add any value.
Yeah.
But he took a different approach. He's probably in the best shape he's ever been in his life. He started his own family office. He got his son involved in some different real estate investments that they're working on. And I mean, he's probably doing better than any time in his life. He got refocused, re-energized. He wasn't going to let them bring him down. I'm sure there was a period of loss and some pain from saying, we really don't need you anymore. And I know there was, because he did communicate that. But he was able to refocus and create a new drive for himself. Like I said, best shape he's ever been in, probably not just physical, but I think a mental standpoint as well. Just very re-energized, refocused.
And I imagine, Stu, that some of them also get involved in new ventures.
Actually, a couple that exited a business in their mid-30s. For the husband, who was one of the founding partners in the business, he's now kind of refocused on investing into startups and advising startups. So playing a role in it, but not being one of those founding partners. And it seems to be filling a void and a gap there. Don't know if he plans to, do something else and restart another business the way he did. But I think he's getting a lot of joy in sharing his experiences and helping guide several startup companies that he's invested into.
This notion of starting a new business is an interesting one. A Harvard Business Review study found that entrepreneurs have about a 30% success rate the second time around, compared to a success rate of 18% for first-time founders. The same study also found that they were more likely to succeed in their second venture if they stuck to the same industry and had a strong founding team. I asked Stu what he had observed when entrepreneurs start new businesses.
Yeah, I have two of my members that have sold their business and have recognized an opportunity, and they're both working on it. I'd say one of the things they both say is, well, I want to do it right the first time as we build this new business. I learned a lot building the first business and tripped and fell and, scraped my knees. I'd like to take those learnings and apply it here and really get this business running smoother, quicker, faster. Especially when you build up a business, you have a lot of employees. Now you're starting from scratch. They're kind of used to having this network of support, and now they realize there is not this network of support. They have to be a little bit more hands-on than they're used to being, because as they've grown and scaled their business, they were able to expand and have people to help, again, handle different functions of the business. One of my members hired a CEO, and I'm really proud of him. So that person's really helping from a day-to-day, and he's in that visionary seat, helping create the vision and having the CEO help execute that vision, where he didn't have that before. He was kind of doing it all.
You mentioned the money, and I want to talk a little bit about the financial implications of the sale, because that's a whole other loaded area, I think. For a lot of people, investing proves more difficult than they might expect. And something I've always said is that when you sell a business, the next day you have a new business, and it's called the wealth management business, whether you think about it like that or not. But whatever business you've been in, you're not necessarily trained or well prepared for that wealth management business. The fact that you were brilliant and successful and had a wonderful logistics company, for example, really doesn't prepare you to then manage money. And I just wonder what you see with the entrepreneurs that you talk to about their feelings around that.
Yeah. So I'd say that's the basis for why Tiger 21 was formed. It's because there aren't many people you could actually go and talk to that are in your network that have sold their business, have created wealth, and don't know what to do with it. For all the years you're building wealth as you're building your business, you're an expert in that industry that your business is in. And for the most part, many are relying on outside professionals to help manage the wealth you're building. We have wealth managers, tax advisors, legal advisors, and I'd say for the most part, we just assume they know what they're doing and leave it at that. It's when you do have liquidity now, having that network of other people to talk to that have experienced that is invaluable, because you can't go to your neighbor and say, hey, I just sold my business for so many millions of dollars. I'm not sure what to do now. They're like, huh, what do you mean?
Yeah, give me that problem.
Yeah, exactly. Just sit back and enjoy. It's finding that network of people to talk to help give you guidance, real world guidance, not based on theory, but real world experience to share.
Okay, so based on that, what 2 or 3 pieces of advice, of real world advice, would you give somebody if they, say, for example, entered your group today, they've sold their business? What do you want to tell them?
So I'd say connect and get to know your personal board of directors here. Get to know them, build relationships, identify what are some of your biggest concerns and issues that you want to get feedback from the group, and please listen, and then you need to take action. I had one of my members in my group had sold his business. I'd say was floundering for a year or two, wasn't sure what to do, felt he didn't have value anymore, and wasn't, he even didn't think he had added value to our group, which was crazy. But that's, how our mind starts to think. We start to devalue ourselves. So it's about talking to other people, engaging with others, listening, but taking action. Because if we don't take action, then we get stuck. And you can easily get stuck and you can easily get depressed. On the outside, you're thinking, why would you be depressed? You just sold your business, you've got this money. How could you be depressed? But the reality is, you feel alone. You feel like you're not needed and wanted the way you were before. You're not an expert anymore because you were in your industry. Now you've got this wealth that creates fear and anxiety. How do I hold on to this wealth I built? How do I manage the wealth I built? And what do I do with it? It creates a tremendous amount of fear. As much as everyone on the outside thinks, oh God, he's got it made.
Is it fear that I'm going to lose it? Or is it fear that I'm going to be the chump that only makes 3% a year when I know I should be or could be doing 6 or 8 or 10 or whatever? What is the fear about?
I think the initial fear is I'm going to screw this up and lose it. That's the first fear.
And that has to be, it's real, but I would think in most of the cases you're talking about, it's fairly irrational.
Yeah, it definitely can be considered irrational because I've got members in my Tiger group that have created tremendous generational wealth that will impact their families for generations. Yet they're worried that I can lose it all or spend too much. In many cases, we've shared you can spend all the money you have in the rest of your life. Try to deal with that reality and try to understand you are positioned well. You're in a good spot. Try to let go of that because that's not real. That's in your head.
Yeah. I would think as well, maybe being a very successful, smart, savvy entrepreneur, now you are a novice at something. And that's got to feel uncomfortable. And it's not just, when it's your business, you're controlling how you make money. Yes, you have a team around you. Yes, you have advisors, but you understand your business and you may rely on people, but the success and failure comes down to you and you're comfortable with that. Whereas when you set up a family office or you're hiring managers, you're dependent on these third parties and you might not and probably don't even have the skills to assess and measure these third parties to know if they're doing a good job. And I think that takes some getting used to.
That's very accurate. That's part of this fear is I don't want to screw it up, but I am not an expert in this area. I'm used to being an expert in, controlling my business. Now I have control, but it could be out of control, and I don't know if it's in control or not. And so it is that fear. It can be overwhelming, and fear is a very powerful emotion that can stop you from moving forward. You can freeze. And having a network to talk to that can help you understand, hey, I went through the same exact thing. Here's what I did. And be able to hear how others have coped and operated and taken the next step forward. How do we even interview wealth managers? What am I looking for? What are questions I need to ask? How do I know if they're performing well or not performing well? All of those questions, there's a lot going on that can have emotional, physical impact for that person.
When you say somebody comes in and benefits from the experience of the group and people can say, look, here's what worked for me and here's how I did it. What are they saying typically? What does work?
It is being able to, I think, utilize others' experience, such as, okay, how do I even interview for a wealth advisor? So, hey, here's the questions I used. Here's what we came up with. Why don't you take a look at these? Why don't you tweak what works for you and edit it? But as simple as that is a helpful tool to get somebody started and start to educate themselves. One of my members couldn't spell estate planning when he joined our group, and he just did a whole presentation last week on his estate plan and spoke at such a high level of depth and knowledge and understanding that you can tell he was in his sweet spot now, where 3 years ago, oh my God, it created fear and angst. Having that firsthand knowledge and experience, learning from others, having a network of, well, who do I talk to? Who can help me with this? Has been very helpful for people to be able to move forward.
There are a number of advisors who listen to this podcast. How can they be helpful? What advice do you have for advisors?
To really listen to their client. So many times I've heard, I just feel like I'm getting put into a mold and they just fill in the blanks on the forms. Really listen to what your client is looking for and what they want. Not everyone fits into the same mold. I've heard this too often, and I think that would be my first piece of advice.
Some entrepreneurs I know are, shall we say, disenchanted with the types of investment returns that traditional wealth managers can earn. And I've certainly seen this over the course of my career, particularly younger people. And if I can say, people who've made their money rather quickly tend to have higher expectations for investment returns. And the, 6 to 8% a year just doesn't excite them at all. What are you seeing them go and do with their money? And is there sort of a reckoning that occurs at some point?
Yeah, so what's interesting was Tiger 21 was formed around 1999, 2000. And for all these years, up until 2022, even through half of 22, real estate was the highest asset allocation for all Tiger 21 members overall as an average. Today, private equity is the largest asset allocation for Tiger 21 members worldwide. So there's been a shift into private equity in a much bigger and stronger way.
Would that include one's own private business, or are you talking about hands-off?
It includes private business, but beyond that, from an investment standpoint as well. When I refer to private equity, it's now they've been shifting more investment dollars into outside private equity firms as part of their strategy.
And for a lot of entrepreneurs that I have seen over the years, that becomes part of their new purpose after the sale. They invest in private equity, not just in a passive way, like through funds or something, but through an active way. They might take a seat on the board, or they might offer the company some advice. And if I can say, with really mixed results. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, it's different. I've got one of my members very focused in private equities on 3 or 4 boards, and it can be a bit frustrating because they're not the sole decision maker anymore. So they can share their input, their feedback, but many times they're used to making the decision and moving forward. Now it's a voice, but they can't act with that voice.
I want to shift gears for a moment. On the list of things that change as a result of the sale of a company, there is an impact on relationships and often marriages. And there's no definitive data or studies, but I know that anecdotal evidence suggests that the financial windfall from the sale of a company can put a strain on a marriage. What's your perspective on that?
I've seen it in a few different ways. One, there's this wealth now that they didn't have before, and they're not always in alignment or agreement on how to manage and handle that. How does that impact their kids and their family? I've got some clients that don't want to talk to their spouse about the wealth.
Because they'd be challenged on it, they would have a different viewpoint.
Yeah, they just think it's simpler and easier. There are some spouses that say, I don't want to know. You do it. You take care of it, which creates a whole other issue when something happens where that person's no longer there anymore and you got like a rudderless ship. So it does create challenges. Then there's also the time impact, because if that entrepreneur doesn't have a plan in place as to what they're doing with themselves, after the golf wears off and the boating wears off, and now, okay, well, hey, I'm home. Not always are spouses used to their spouses being around all that time.
Right.
That creates pressure and stress. And, if you think back in many marriages, as spouses, we're not together for many, many hours of the day.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we're together for many, many hours. Doesn't mean it's a great fit.
I would think as well for the spouse, the sale of the company would be a pretty joyous event, de-risk the balance sheet, you've got new liquid wealth, and there's no loss of identity for the spouse, really, unless the spouse was involved in the business. And so the spouse would have a very different emotional response to the sale and might not even recognize the negative impact on their partner.
Absolutely. And I'll just say this, especially for men, and I'm making a generalized statement, but a lot of men are not good at communicating what's going on in their head and their heart. And so to be able to share and say, I'm feeling alone or I'm feeling unwanted, I don't have a purpose, can be very difficult to share. And many times I don't think is shared. So there's this disconnect between spouses because they're really not on the same page. And many times that entrepreneur that sold the business hasn't really experienced that before. So they're kind of in this new area that they hadn't been ever before.
Right. Other relationships, friends, other family members, siblings, it can change the nature of those relationships as well, can't it?
It can. This comes up quite a bit in our tiger groups. So now you've sold your business and you can live your life a little differently, your lifestyle, but your friends and family haven't experienced that transaction and that change in their life. Yet, how do you deal with, well, now I want to fly first class, or I want to fly private, or I want to stay at the 5-star resort, not the 4-star resort? How do you deal with that? And it's a real world issue
Mm-hmm.
for people that have exited and yeah, it's a real world issue and it creates some challenge for both sides.
So, what's the answer? What do you do?
Oh, it's simple. No, you got to talk it through. I'll tell you, we had this situation came up in my Tiger Group session with one of my members at his home in Florida, invites friends to come over and brings them out golfing. And the expectation is, well, we're going to stay for a while, and he's now responsible for picking up the tab for everything. So we talked about it in our group, and we came up with a plan. And that was when we invite people over, we set a time limit. Okay, 3 nights. That's how we handle our family and friends that come.
It's the old fish and house guests. After 3 days, they start to stink.
That comment was made because one of my other members said, I applied what we talked about and it worked and it was great. So that's dealing with guests, but I had this with another member about flying first class. To their friend said, you know what? I have all these points from Delta. I'd love to upgrade you if you don't mind. So not saying I am paying for it, but hey, I've got all these extra points. I'd love to upgrade you to first class on this trip. So that was one way of handling flights. It does get a little bit more challenging when you want to stay at certain resorts and others really can't afford to stay at those resorts. I don't have a quick answer for that one, but
Switching gears again, now we've been talking broadly about entrepreneurs and their wealth, and now I'd like to ask you a few questions that I ask every guest at the end of each episode to get your views on wealth. So, Stu, was there ever a moment or an experience that you had where you realized, I'm now wealthy?
yeah, I guess a couple things. One, we just were able to take a trip and not worry about it and think about it. Did a 2-week Mediterranean cruise and was able to really unplug and realizing that was part of me selling the business. It's not mine anymore. And two, just being able to kind of live at that kind of style that we never lived at before. And the other is just knowing, hey, we see something we wanted, like a second home in Florida, we were able to say, let's just do it. We didn't stress about it. We didn't lose sleep over it. So that were a couple of realities.
What do you know about money that you didn't know until you sold your business?
I really never spent time on understanding a strategy from an investment standpoint and really understanding the different asset allocations and trying to create what's the right mix and balance. I just was focused on my business and I did not ever think about it, to be honest with you. And so it was trying to develop and understand the strategy and thinking longer term from generational and estate planning took it to a whole other level as well.
You talk about purpose. What is the purpose of your wealth?
What I think wealth offers are options. Options to how I want to live my life, how I want to engage with my family, how much do I want to work, not work. It provides options, and that to me is probably had the biggest impact. It's a sense of providing some freedom and not feeling like I'm have to do something because I have to do this, but those are now options of what I want to do.
What's the best piece of financial advice you were ever given or gave to someone else?
That's a great question. Well, the one piece of advice I've given to both my kids was as they're growing in their careers to develop other streams of income that over time will help take them to another level. That's a regret I have that I didn't do while I was focused on my business, and that's the one thing I recommend to them.
Well, I don't know about you, but that conversation really brought home for me the emotional impact that selling a business can have on an entrepreneur and their family. And even though I had done a lot of research and work on this subject throughout my career, somehow hearing it firsthand with the honesty and vulnerability that Stu provided gives it new dimension. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Stu Wolff for sharing his experience and shedding light on a reality that many of us may not have considered ever before. If you want to contact Stu about Tiger 21, or you're a business owner who wants to grow their company and learn more about EOS, you can find him at wolffleadershipllc.com, and that's Wolff spelt with 2 F's. Or Stu says give him a call at 248-310-8026. And if you'd like to read the Tiger 21 report on life after selling a business, you can download it from their website, tiger21.com. Thanks for listening to Serious Coin. If you enjoyed the content, please leave us a rating or review. It helps us to be found by more listeners. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening.